The silence of space was broken by a crackling transmission that made Lieutenant Commander Marcus Reed nearly spill his coffee across the control panel. For 3 years he had been stationed at Outpost Sigma 7, a monitoring station floating in the cold darkness near Jupiter, listening to nothing but cosmic background radiation and the occasional asteroid collision. Today was different. "Elena, get over here right now," Marcus called to Dr. Elena Vasquez, who was reviewing star charts in the corner of the cramped command center. The transmission was weak and filled with static, but underneath the noise was something that made his blood run cold. It sounded like screaming. Elena rushed to his side and plugged in her headphones. Her face went pale as she listened to the alien sounds coming through the speakers. She had spent her entire career studying theoretical xenolinguistics, waiting for the day humanity would make first contact. She never imagined it would sound like this. "Run the signal through the translation matrix," she whispered, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. The computer began breaking down the transmission into patterns and frequencies. Hours passed as Elena worked tirelessly to decode the message while Marcus monitored for any other signals. When the translation finally appeared on screen, both humans stared in disbelief. The message was fragmented but clear enough to understand. It spoke of a species called the Kithara, peaceful beings who lived on floating cities above their homeworld. They were dying. Something called the Collective was destroying everything in its path, turning entire civilizations into slaves or simply wiping them out completely. The most chilling part of the message was what came next. The Kithara had heard rumors of a species living on a dangerous world somewhere in this part of the galaxy, a species so violent and primitive that the Collective might not notice them, a species that knew how to fight and kill because their own planet had taught them these skills through millions of years of survival. "They are talking about us," Elena said quietly, pointing to the translated text on her screen. "They know about Earth somehow. They know we come from what they call a death world." Marcus felt his hands shake as he reached for the emergency communication system that would connect him directly to Earth Command. He had never used it before, never thought he would need to. The training said to only activate it in case of immediate threat to human civilization. "This counts," he muttered as he pressed the red button. Within minutes, Admiral Victoria Kane appeared on the main screen from her office in the Seoul Defense Fleet headquarters. Her stern face showed no emotion as she listened to the translated message. Behind her, Marcus could see other officers gathering to hear the transmission. "How long ago was this sent?" Kane asked after hearing the entire message. Elena checked her calculations twice before answering. "Based on the signal degradation and the distance it traveled, approximately 18 hours ago. But Admiral, there is something else. The message mentions that their world will be reached by the Collective in less than 3 days." Kane was quiet for a long moment, her eyes studying the data on her own screens. Marcus knew she was weighing options that could change humanity's future forever. Earth had always assumed that when first contact came, it would be peaceful exploration or scientific exchange. Nobody had planned for a desperate alien species begging for military help. "Admiral," Elena continued, "the message includes coordinates to their homeworld and everything they know about the Collective's technology. They have energy weapons, faster than light travel, and something they call conversion devices that turn captured beings into cybernetic soldiers." The silence stretched on as Kane processed this information. Finally, she spoke in the calm voice that had made her famous during the Mars colony conflicts. "Dr. Vasquez, I need you to prepare a complete analysis of everything in that message. Commander Reed, maintain monitoring protocols and watch for any other transmissions." "What are we going to do?" Marcus asked. Though he was afraid of the answer, Kane's expression hardened. "We are going to do what humans have always done when innocent people cry for help. We are going to answer that call." The transmission ended, leaving Marcus and Elena alone in the monitoring station. They both knew that everything had just changed. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and their first alien neighbors were about to be destroyed by something that sounded like a nightmare made real. Elena returned to her workstation and began preparing detailed files on the Collectives. technology, and tactics. From what she could understand, they were machine-enhanced beings who had conquered dozens of worlds. Their ships were powerful and their weapons were advanced, but something about their methods suggested they had never fought a species like humanity. "Marcus, look at this," Elena called out as she studied the tactical data included in the Cathara message. "The collective attacks are always direct. They approach each world openly, demand surrender, and then overwhelm any resistance with superior technology. They do not use deception or surprise attacks." Marcus read over her shoulder and felt a grim smile cross his face. "They fight like they expect their enemies to be civilized." "Exactly. Every species they have conquered was peaceful before the attack. They have never faced a world where the inhabitants spent thousands of years fighting each other just to survive." As they worked through the night, both humans began to understand that the collective might have made a terrible mistake. They had encountered a species that knew about war not as a last resort, but as a way of life. Earth had produced warriors, tacticians, and soldiers who had turned violence into an art form. The next morning brought new transmissions from Earth. Admiral Kane had convinced the Earth Council to authorize a response mission. Ships were being prepared and soldiers were being briefed on humanity's first interstellar military operation. But as Marcus monitored the long-range sensors, he detected something that made his heart race. Massive energy signatures were moving through space toward the Cathara homeworld. The collective had found them, and they were coming fast. He immediately sent the sensor data to Earth Command and received an urgent response from Kane herself. "Commander Reed, you have just given us our timeline. The collective advance fleet will reach the Cathara homeworld in exactly 72 hours. Marcus stared at the sensor readings showing the approaching alien ships. Somewhere out there, peaceful species was about to face extinction. Behind him, Elena was still working on translations while Earth prepared for its first war among the stars. 72 hours, he repeated quietly, watching the energy signatures grow stronger on his screen. In 3 days, humanity would learn if they could truly answer the call for help, or if they would simply become the next target for the collective's endless expansion across the galaxy. The Deathworlders were about to meet their first real test among the stars. Colonel James Harrison gripped the armrest of his command chair as the stealth frigate Endeavour dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Thyro system. Through the viewscreen, he could see the Cathara homeworld glowing like a blue jewel against the darkness of space. Floating cities drifted through the upper atmosphere like glittering soap bubbles, connected by streams of light that pulsed with alien energy. "Beautiful," whispered Dr. Nathan Cross, the military advisor who sat beside Harrison. "Hard to believe something this peaceful could be under threat." Harrison nodded but kept his attention focused on the tactical displays. His ship was one of 3 vessels that had made the desperate journey from Earth in just under 60 hours. The other 2 ships carried diplomatic equipment and emergency supplies. But the Endeavour was loaded with something the peaceful galaxy had never seen before: human weapons of war. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission from the surface," reported Communications Officer Linda Torres from her station. "The Cathara are asking us to dock at their primary city." As the Endeavour descended through the atmosphere, Harrison got his first close look at the alien civilization. The floating cities were even more impressive up close, held aloft by some kind of anti-gravity technology that human scientists could barely comprehend. Gardens and parks covered every surface, and the buildings themselves seemed to be grown. Rather than built, the docking bay where they landed was filled with Cathara waiting to greet them. Harrison had studied the translated descriptions, but seeing them in person was still a shock. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with crystalline skin that reflected light in rainbow patterns. Their movements were graceful and flowing, like dancers performing an ancient ritual. High, resonant life approached the human delegation with what appeared to be curiosity rather than fear. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but the translation device provided by Elena Vasquez converted the sounds into perfect English. "Welcome, beings from the Deathworld called Earth. We are grateful beyond words that you have answered our call for assistance. Harrison felt uncomfortable being called a Deathworlder, but he understood what the alien meant. High resonant life, we have come to help, but we need to understand exactly what we are facing. Can you show us what the collective has done to other worlds? Life led the human team through the floating city to a massive chamber filled with crystalline displays. With a gesture, the alien activated recordings that showed the destruction of dozens of worlds. Harrison watched in grim silence as the collective ships approached each planet with overwhelming force, demanding immediate surrender before beginning their conquest. They convert the captured populations into cybernetic soldiers, Life explained. As the recordings showed beings from various species being taken aboard collective ships, those who cannot be converted are eliminated. The resources of each world are stripped and transported to their expansion fleets. Dr. Cross studied the tactical data with the eye of a professional soldier. How do other species usually defend themselves against these attacks? The Kythera's crystalline features somehow manage to convey sadness. Most species attempt to negotiate or use defensive shields to protect their populations while evacuating to other worlds. Some try to hide their civilizations or use jamming technology to avoid detection. Harrison and Cross exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Every defensive strategy the aliens described was based on the assumption that warfare should be conducted with honor and minimal loss of life. None of the conquered species had ever considered that war itself could be a weapon. Life, we need to see your current defensive preparations, Harrison said carefully. The alien led them to another chamber where Kythera military planners were working on elegant holographic displays. Their defensive strategy was beautifully organized and completely inadequate. They planned to use harmonic shields to protect their cities while civilian transports evacuated the population to safe worlds beyond collective territory. How long will your shields hold against collective weapons? Cross asked. Our calculations suggest approximately 4 hours of protection against direct assault. One of the Kythera military advisors responded proudly. Harrison felt his heart sink. 4 hours was barely enough time to evacuate a single city, much less an entire planet. Worse, the Kythera seemed to believe that the collective would follow some kind of honor code during the attack, giving them time to organize their evacuation. Life, I need to ask you a difficult question, Harrison said. Has any species ever successfully fought back against the collective? The alien's crystalline skin flickered with patterns that the translation device interpreted as confusion. Fought back. We do not understand this concept in the context of warfare. Cross leaned forward in his chair. Has anyone ever killed collective soldiers? Has anyone ever destroyed their ships or used weapons to stop them? Such actions would be considered barbaric, Lyth replied. Civilized beings do not intentionally cause harm to other sentient creatures, even in self-defense. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison realized that humanity was about to become involved in a war where every other participant had voluntarily limited themselves to defensive actions only. The collective had never faced an enemy that was willing to kill without hesitation or remorse. Lyth, we need to discuss human military capabilities, Harrison said finally. Our species has a very different approach to warfare. Over the next several hours, Harrison and Cross explained human military history to the increasingly shocked Kythera leadership. They described concepts like ambush tactics, guerrilla warfare, and the deliberate targeting of enemy supply lines. The aliens listened with what could only be described as horrified fascination. You intentionally destroy enemy vessels with their crews still aboard? Lyth asked, its voice filled with disbelief. When necessary, Cross replied matter-of-factly. War is not a game or a ritual. It is about survival, and survival sometimes requires eliminating threats completely. As the briefing continued, long-range sensors began detecting the approach of the collective's advanced fleet. Harrison watched the tactical displays showing dozens of enemy ships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. But something was different about their approach pattern. They are not attacking immediately, observed the Kythera sensor operator. The collective fleet has stopped at the system's edge and appears to be conducting detailed scans. Cross studied the enemy formation with growing interest. They have never seen ships like ours before. Look at their positioning. They are being cautious. Harrison felt a grim smile cross his face as he realized what was happening. For the first time in their expansion across the galaxy, the collective had encountered something that made them pause. They had detected the human ships and were trying to understand what they represented. "Life, we need to prepare for battle," Harrison announced. "But we are going to fight this war using human rules, not collective rules." The alien leader's crystalline features shifted to patterns that suggested deep concern. What do human rules of warfare involve? Harrison looked out at the beautiful floating cities and the peaceful beings who had never known the brutality of true combat. In a few hours they would learn why Earth was called a death world and why humanity had survived when so many other species had been conquered. "Human rules are simple," he said quietly. "We fight to win and we use every advantage we can find." The collective is about to discover that not every species in this galaxy learned to solve problems with negotiation and defensive shields. Through the view screen, the collective ships continued their cautious approach, unaware that they were about to face the first species in galactic history that had turned warfare into a science and killing into an art form. Supreme Overlord Vex stood in the command center of the massive collective flagship, studying the tactical displays with growing confusion. In over 2,000 years of conquest, no species had ever made the collective pause at the edge of a star system. Yet here they were conducting detailed scans instead of beginning the standard conquest protocol. "Tactical Prime Nexus, explain the delay," Vex commanded. Its cybernetic voice echoing through the chamber filled with machine-enhanced beings. Nexus approached with mechanical precision, its organic brain housed within a metallic skull that glowed. "With processing power?" "Supreme Overlord, our scans have detected 3 unknown vessels in orbit around the target world. The energy signatures do not match any known galactic civilization." Vex examined the sensor data with interest. The 3 ships were small compared to collective vessels, but their hull compositions and weapon configurations were completely unfamiliar. More troubling was their positioning. Instead of forming a defensive line around the planet, they had scattered throughout the asteroid belt that surrounded the Cathara homeworld. "Perhaps they are attempting to hide," suggested Combat Prime Zareth from its position at the weapons console. "Primitive species often attempt concealment when faced with superior technology." Before Vex could respond, the tactical display erupted with alarm signals. One of the human ships had appeared directly behind a collective scout vessel and opened fire with weapons that tore through the ship's energy shields like they were made of paper. The scout vessel exploded in seconds, its debris spreading through space. "Impossible," Nexus stated, its mechanical voice filled with something resembling shock. "No known weapon system can penetrate our defensive shields with such efficiency." Captain Diana Torres smiled grimly from the bridge of her destroyer as she watched the collective ship disintegrate. Human kinetic weapons were crude compared to alien energy systems, but they had one advantage that no peaceful species had ever considered. They were designed specifically to kill. "Take us back into the asteroid field," Torres ordered her helmsman. "Let them think about that for a while." Her ship vanished among the rocky debris, leaving the collective fleet to wonder where the attack had come from. Torres had spent 20 years fighting pirates and rebels throughout the solar system, learning to use every advantage that space combat could provide. The collective was about to receive an education in human tactical thinking aboard the collective flagship. Vex was experiencing something it had not felt in centuries: uncertainty. The attack pattern made no sense according to standard galactic warfare protocols. Civilized species announced their defensive intentions, formed battle lines, and engaged in honorable combat. They did not hide among asteroids and strike without warning. "Deploy the scanner drones," Vex commanded. "Locate these unknown vessels and determine their capabilities." A dozen small collective ships spread throughout the asteroid field, their sensors probing for any sign of the human vessels. Within minutes, they found what they were looking for or thought they had. Energy signatures appeared on multiple sensors, suggesting that all three human ships were hiding behind a cluster of large asteroids. "Target located," reported Zareth. "Recommend immediate assault with full battle group." 6 collective warships moved toward the asteroid cluster with their weapons charging. As they approached firing range, the asteroids themselves suddenly exploded outward, revealing that the energy signatures had been decoys planted by human engineering teams. The real attack came from above and below as Torres and her fellow captains struck from positions the collective had never thought to scan. Commander Riley Brooks led the second human destroyer in a diving attack that brought her ship within point-blank range of a collective vessel. Instead of exchanging fire at a respectful distance, Brooks ordered her ship to ram the enemy vessel while firing explosive charges directly into its hull. The collective ship's energy shields were designed to deflect directed energy weapons, not to stop a physical collision with a vessel loaded with human military explosives. The impact tore through the alien ship's superstructure and sent both vessels spinning through space. But only the human crew had trained for this kind of desperate combat. "Boarding parties, move out," Brooks ordered as her Marines prepared to cross into the damaged collective ship. Master Sergeant Alex Rivera led the first squad of human soldiers to ever board an alien vessel in combat. What they found inside the collective ship challenged everything they thought they knew about their enemies. The corridors were filled with beings that had once been organic but were now more machine than living creature. Rivera's squad moved through the ship, using urban warfare tactics developed in the ruins of Earth cities. They used explosives to create their own doorways, ignored the ship's layout in favor of cutting through walls, and treated the vessel itself as just another building to be cleared room by room. The collective defenders were completely unprepared for this approach. Their cybernetic enhancements gave them superior reflexes and processing power, but they had never faced enemies who refused to follow the established rules of civilized warfare. The human Marines fought like the predators they were, using every dirty trick that millions of years of evolution had taught them. "Rivera, what are you finding in there?" Brooks asked over the communication system as explosions echoed through both ships. "These are not soldiers, Commander," Rivera replied as his squad fought their way toward the ship's data core. "They are converted beings from conquered worlds. Some of them still have organic parts that remember what they used to be." The discovery sent a chill through the human assault force. The collective was not just conquering civilizations, they were turning the conquered populations into weapons for future conquests. Every enemy they faced had once been someone's family, someone's friend, someone's child, but instead of making the humans hesitate, the knowledge only made them fight harder. Rivera's squad reached the ship's central computer and began downloading every piece of data they could find about collective operations, technology, and future targets. Meanwhile, in space around them, the battle continued with a brutality that shocked both sides. The human ships refused to engage in the predictable dance of long-range combat that the collective expected. Instead, they used the asteroids for cover, launched surprise attacks from unexpected angles, and targeted the enemy supply ships instead of the heavily armed warships. Torres watched her tactical display as 2 more collective vessels fell to coordinated human attacks. The aliens were powerful and their technology was advanced, but they fought like they expected their enemies to be reasonable. They left their flanks exposed because no civilized species would attack from behind. They used predictable formation patterns because honorable beings announced their intentions before attacking. "Supreme Overlord," Nexus reported with something resembling panic in its mechanical voice. "We have lost 4 vessels and gained no tactical advantage. The unknown ships are using warfare methods that do not appear in any of our databases." Vex stared at the tactical display showing the positions of the human ships. They moved like predators hunting prey, striking and vanishing before the collective could respond effectively. Worse, they seemed to be learning from each engagement, adapting their tactics to exploit every weakness in collective defensive strategies. "Contact the main fleet," Vex ordered finally. Inform First Prime that we have encountered something unprecedented. These beings do not fight like any known galactic civilization. As the message was transmitted across space to the approaching collective armada, Rivera's squad completed their data download and prepared to evacuate the captured ship. But their scanners were already detecting something that made their blood run cold, massive energy signatures emerging from hyperspace. At the edge of the system, the main collective fleet had arrived, and it was 10 times larger than the advance force. Hundreds of ships began moving toward Theros Prime with the inexorable advance of a mechanical avalanche. At their head was a vessel so large it seemed more like a mobile space station than a ship. "Brooks, we need to get out of here right now," Rivera reported as his squad fought their way back to their own ship. "The cavalry just arrived, and they brought everyone they have." Through the viewscreen of her destroyer, Torres could see the approaching armada and knew that the real battle was about to begin. The advance fleet had been just a probe, a way for the collective to test their unknown opponents. Now the full might of their war machine was coming to finish what they had started, but as the human ships regrouped among the asteroids, Torres felt no fear, only anticipation. The collective had just learned that not every species in the galaxy was civilized. And now they were about to discover what happened when Deathworlders decided to go to war. Fleet Admiral Robert Stone stood on the bridge of the massive human dreadnought Defiance as it dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Theros system. Behind him, the largest war fleet in human history began emerging from faster-than-light travel, 50 ships that had been built in secret construction yards hidden throughout the solar system. "Contact Captain Torres immediately," Stone ordered his communications officer. "I want a full tactical briefing on collective capabilities and weaknesses." Through the main viewscreen, Stone could see the collective armada approaching Theros, Prime like a mechanical storm. Hundreds of ships moved in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with energy shields and weapon systems that could reduce planets to ash. At the center of the fleet was a command vessel so enormous it blocked out the stars behind it. "Admiral, we are receiving data from the advance teams," reported Commander Janet Walsh from her position at the tactical station. "The collective has superior numbers and technology, but their tactical thinking is extremely limited." Stone studied the incoming data with the eye of a man who had spent 40 years learning how to kill efficiently. The collective fought like they expected their enemies to be reasonable, and that was going to be their downfall. Human military doctrine was based on a simple principle. In war, there were no rules except winning. "Begin deployment of assault platforms," Stone commanded. "I want mining charges placed throughout the asteroid field and stealth drones positioned for maximum coverage." As the human fleet prepared for battle, Lieutenant General Maria Santos was coordinating something that had never been attempted before: the evacuation of an entire alien civilization, while simultaneously preparing their homeworld for war. The Kithara had finally agreed to let the humans help them, but their definition of help was very different from what the aliens had expected. "High Resonant Light, your people need to understand that we cannot save your cities," Santos explained to the alien leader as they stood in the primary control center of the largest floating city. "But we can save your people and turn your world into a weapon." Light's crystalline features shifted to patterns that the translation device interpreted as deep concern. "You wish to destroy our homeworld?" "No, we wish to weaponize it," Santos replied. "Your cities use harmonic resonance technology to stay aloft. Our engineers believe we can modify that technology to create a planetary defense system unlike anything the collective has ever encountered." Dr. Rebecca Morgan worked frantically at a captured collective computer terminal, trying to understand the technology that powered their massive fleet. What she had discovered made her hands shake as she typed her report to Admiral Stone. The collective was not just advanced, they were ancient, possibly older than human civilization by millions of years. "Admiral, you need to see this," Morgan reported over the communication system. "The entity commanding the collective fleet is not just their leader, it is the last survivor of the first species they ever conquered. It has been alive for over 3 billion years. Stone felt his blood run cold as he read Morgan's analysis. The first prime was not a machine-enhanced being like the others in the collective. It was something that had chosen to become mechanical rather than die with its species. It had been leading the collective's expansion across the galaxy since before Earth even had complex life. "Ma'am, what are the tactical implications?" Stone asked. Morgan's voice carried a note of awe and terror. "It has personally overseen the conquest of thousands of worlds. Every possible defensive strategy has been used against it at some point. Every type of weapon, every formation, every tactical approach, the first prime has seen it all and developed countermeasures." The knowledge should have been devastating to human morale, but Stone felt only grim determination. The first prime had indeed seen every defensive strategy that civilized species could develop, but it had never faced a species that treated warfare as an art form rather than a last resort. Staff. Sergeant William Carter led teams of human engineers and Cathara technicians through the floating cities, installing modifications that would convert the beautiful alien structures into weapons of mass destruction. The work was dangerous and exhausting, made worse by the constant attacks from collective assault troops who beamed down to stop the conversion process. "Carter, how much longer do you need?" Santos asked as explosions echoed through the city. Around them, 6 more hours to complete the resonance amplifiers, Carter replied while firing his rifle at a squad of collective soldiers advancing through the gardens. "But only if these converted beings stop trying to kill us every 5 minutes. The fighting in the floating cities was unlike anything in human military experience. The collective troops were fast and strong, their cybernetic enhancements giving them advantages that human soldiers could barely match. But they fought with the same predictable patterns that characterized all their military operations. Carter's team used the alien architecture to their advantage, turning the peaceful gardens and flowing corridors into kill zones that channeled enemy movement into carefully prepared ambush points. The Cathara watched in fascination and horror as the humans transformed their beautiful city into a fortress designed for maximum lethality. "The resonance cascade is almost ready," reported Cathara technician Vel, its crystalline hands dancing over control surfaces that glowed with increasing energy. "But William Carter, the power levels required will destroy our city once the weapon is fired." Carter paused in his work to look at the alien being who had become his partner in this desperate project. "Vel, do you understand what the collective will do to your people if we fail?" The alien's features shifted to patterns of grim understanding. "They will convert us into machines like themselves, erasing everything we were to serve their expansion. Our choice is to die as ourselves or live as their weapons." "Then we make sure the weapon works," Carter said simply, returning to his modifications of the alien technology. In space above them, Admiral Stone watched as the collective fleet approached the range where their main weapons could target the planet. The First Prime's command ship led the formation with the confidence of a predator that had never encountered effective resistance. "All ships, begin attack pattern Omega," Stone commanded, activating a battle plan that would have horrified any civilized military strategist. The human fleet scattered throughout the system like seeds in the wind, abandoning any pretense of honorable formation combat. Some ships hid behind the planet's moons, while others positioned themselves among the wreckage of earlier battles. A few vessels actually powered down their engines and drifted through space like dead hulks, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The First Prime watched this deployment with something resembling curiosity. In 3 billion years of conquest, it had never seen defenders voluntarily break formation and scatter their forces. The tactical computer systems that had analyzed thousands of previous battles found no precedent for this behavior. Analysis. Prime explained this deployment pattern. The First Prime commanded in a voice that sounded like grinding metal. "No known tactical doctrine supports this formation," Analysis Prime responded, its cybernetic brain struggling to process the human strategy. "The defensive force has sacrificed all formation cohesion and mutual support. They appear to have abandoned any rational defensive plan. The first prime would have smiled if its mechanical face had been capable of such expression. Perhaps these unknown beings were simply panicking in the face of overwhelming force. It would not be the first time that a species had broken under the pressure of collective superiority. Begin primary assault, the first prime ordered. Target the largest population centers first. The collective fleet opened fire with weapons that could crack continents, their energy beams lancing toward the floating cities of Thyros Prime. But as the attack began, the scattered human ships suddenly came alive with movement that defied all expectations. Instead of trying to intercept the energy beams or protect specific targets, the human vessels began attacking the collective supply ships and support vessels. They ignored the heavily armed warships and concentrated their fire on the logistics, craft that kept the massive fleet operational. Impossible, Analysis Prime reported as explosion after explosion rocked the rear formations of the collective fleet. They are deliberately ignoring our primary combat vessels to attack non-essential support craft. The first prime felt something it had not experienced in millions of years: confusion. No species had ever ignored the primary threat to attack secondary targets. The tactical approach made no sense according to any known principles of warfare, but as the human attacks continued, the confusion began to turn into something else: concern. The collective fleet was powerful, but it required constant resupply and maintenance to operate at peak efficiency. The humans were systematically destroying the infrastructure that kept the armada functional on the surface of Thyros Prime. Carter's teams completed their modifications just as the collective energy beams began striking the planet's atmosphere. The floating cities started to glow with harmonic energy that built to levels the Cathara had never attempted before. Resonance cascade at maximum power, Vel reported, its voice filled with awe and terror. William Carter, we have turned our world into something that should not be possible. Carter smiled grimly as he watched the energy readings climb beyond the safety limits of every system in the city. Vel, my friend, humans have been doing impossible things since we first picked up rocks to use as weapons. The weapon that had once been a beautiful floating city began to sing with a harmonic frequency that resonated through the planet's core and out into space itself. The First Prime's fleet was about to learn that when Deathworlders decided to make war, they turned everything around them into a weapon, even the worlds they were trying to protect. The First Prime felt something impossible happening as alarms screamed throughout its command ship. The planet below was generating harmonic frequencies that penetrated every shield and defense system the collective had ever developed, but worse than the weapon itself was what the energy readings revealed. The unknown species was willing to destroy an entire world just to stop the collective's advance. Analysis Prime, what are the power levels reaching? The First Prime demanded as its ancient consciousness tried to process this unprecedented development. The harmonic cascade has exceeded all known energy output limits, Analysis Prime reported, its mechanical voice filled with something resembling fear. The planet itself has become a weapon of planetary destruction class. The First Prime had seen worlds burn before, had watched as entire civilizations chose death over conversion to the collective cybernetic unity, but never had it encountered a species willing to weaponize an inhabited planet while there were still billions of beings living on its surface. Commander Patricia Hayes led her assault team through the corridors of the First Prime's massive command ship, fighting their way toward the central control center where the ancient entity commanded its fleet. The boarding action was a desperate gamble. Even if they succeeded in reaching the First Prime, there was no guarantee they could stop the planet-killer weapon that was charging in the ship's core. Hayes, you need to move faster, Admiral Stone's voice crackled through her communication device. Long-range sensors show that thing is building up enough energy to crack the planet's core. Hayes ducked behind a bulkhead as collective defenders opened fire with energy weapons that turned the metal walls around her into molten slag. Her assault team was down to 8 soldiers, and they were still 3 levels away from their target. But they kept advancing because that was what humans did when facing impossible odds. Corporal David Kim moved through the ship's ventilation system, crawling through spaces that were too small for the cybernetically enhanced collective soldiers to follow. His mission was simple but probably suicidal: reach the first prime's chamber and plant enough explosives to disrupt its control over the fleet. As Kim crawled through the alien ship's infrastructure, he began to hear something that made him pause. Voices were echoing through the ventilation system, not the mechanical tones of collective soldiers, but something that sounded almost organic, almost alive. Following the sounds, Kim found himself looking down through a grate into a chamber filled with crystalline containers. Inside each container was a being in various stages of cybernetic conversion, and they were all talking to each other in languages he did not recognize. But his translation device was picking up fragments of their conversations, and what he heard made his blood run cold. They were not soldiers or willing converts. They were prisoners, beings from conquered worlds who were being slowly transformed into collective units. Some had been in the process for decades, others for centuries, and all of them remembered what they had been before the collective found them. Kim activated his emergency beacon to contact Hayes. "Commander, I have found something you need to know about. The collective is not just converting people, they are keeping them conscious during the entire process." Hayes received the transmission as her team fought through another corridor filled with cybernetic defenders. The knowledge that every enemy they faced had once been someone's family member made the battle even more horrific, but it also gave her a new understanding of what they were truly fighting against. "Kim, can you reach the first prime's chamber?" Hayes asked while her squad used explosive charges to blast through a sealed doorway. "Affirmative, but Commander, I think the first prime might be just like these other prisoners. I think it was the first being they converted, not their creator." The revelation changed everything Hayes thought she knew about their enemy. If the first prime was also a victim of the collective's conversion process, then maybe there was another way to stop this war besides mutual destruction. Meanwhile, on the surface of Thyros Prime, the harmonic weapon continued building power, as high-resonant light prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. The beautiful crystalline being had merged with the planet's resonance network, becoming one with the weapon that would save its people by destroying their world. "Lithe, you do not have to do this," Carter said as he watched the alien leader's physical form begin to dissolve into pure energy. "We can find another way to stop them." The patterns of light that had been lithe pulsed with what the translation system interpreted as gentle amusement. "William Carter, my people will survive because you taught us that sometimes destruction and creation are the same thing. We give our world so that others may live free." The harmonic cascade reached critical levels just as Kim finally reached the first prime's control chamber. What he found there was not the mechanical overlord he had expected, but something that looked more like a museum exhibit than a military commander. The first prime sat motionless in a chair that seemed to grow out of the ship's deck, its body a mixture of organic tissue and mechanical components that had been fused together over billions of years. But its eyes, the only part that still looked fully alive, were filled with an agony so profound that Kim felt tears running down his face. "You are not like the others," the first prime said in a voice that sounded like wind through ancient ruins. "You come from the world of violence and death, but you still have the capacity for mercy." Kim approached slowly, his weapons lowered. "What are you?" "I am the last of the Vithruk, a species that chose survival over extinction when the collective first emerged from the galactic core," the first prime replied. "For 3 billion years I have led them in their expansion, hoping to find a way to undo what was done to my people." The truth hit Kim like a physical blow. The collective was not a conquering empire, it was a survival mechanism created by beings fleeing from something even worse. The first prime had been leading the conversion of other species because it was the only way it knew to preserve life, in any form. "What were you running from?" Kim asked. The first prime's ancient eyes focused on something beyond the walls of the ship. "The Devourers. Entities from outside our galaxy that consume entire star systems to fuel their expansion into other dimensions. The collective was created to preserve life in the only form that could survive their feeding." Kim felt his mind reeling as he processed this information. The war they were fighting was not between good and evil, but between different methods of survival in a universe that was far more dangerous than humanity had ever imagined. "There has to be another way," Kim said desperately. "Perhaps there is," the First Prime replied, looking at the young human with something resembling hope. "Your species fights in ways we never considered. You turn everything into a weapon, including your own worlds. Maybe you can fight what we could not." On Theros Prime, the harmonic weapon reached maximum power as Light's consciousness spread throughout the planet's crystalline network. The energy wave that erupted from the world's surface was unlike anything ever recorded, a pulse of pure harmonic force that swept through the collective fleet like a cleansing fire, but instead of destroying the ships, the energy did something impossible. It began reversing the cybernetic conversion process, separating the mechanical components from the organic beings who had been forced to become part of the collective. Across dozens of ships, converted soldiers suddenly remembered who they had been before the machines were grafted to their bodies. The First Prime felt the wave wash over its ancient form and experienced something it had not felt in 3 billion years: freedom. The mechanical components that had kept it alive began shutting down, finally allowing it to die as the being it had once been rather than the weapon it had become. "The coordinates," the First Prime whispered to Kim as its systems failed. "Every collective stronghold, every converted world, every species still trapped in our network. Free them all and prepare for what comes after." The data flowed into Kim's suit computer as the First Prime's consciousness finally found the peace it had been seeking for longer than human civilization had existed. Around them, the massive command ship began losing power as its crew rediscovered their individual identities. Admiral Stone watched from the bridge of his flagship as the collective fleet fell into chaos. Ships that had moved in perfect formation for millions of years suddenly broke ranks as their crews remembered what it meant to be individuals rather than components in a vast machine. "Admiral, we are receiving surrender transmissions from over 300 vessels," reported his communications officer. "They are requesting assistance with medical evacuations and asking for safe passage to their original homeworlds." Stone felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had not even realized he was carrying. The war was over, but humanity's role in the galaxy was just beginning. They had not just defeated the collective, they had liberated an entire network of enslaved civilizations. But as the celebration began, deep space monitoring stations detected something that made Stone's blood run cold. Long-range sensors were picking up massive energy signatures moving from the galactic core toward their location. The Devourers had noticed the destruction of the collective, and they were coming to investigate. Hayes and her team evacuated the First Prime ship as it began breaking apart, carrying with them the data that would allow humanity to find and free every remaining collective stronghold. But they also carried the knowledge that their victory had made them visible to something far worse than anything they had yet faced. On Earth, Admiral Kane received the reports of humanity's first interstellar war with a mixture of pride and concern. They had answered the call for help and saved countless civilizations. But in doing so, they had announced their presence to entities that viewed entire galaxies as food sources. The Deathworlders had become the galaxy's protectors, but their greatest test was still approaching from the darkness between the stars. Somewhere in the void, ancient intelligences that had devoured countless worlds were turning their attention toward the small spiral galaxy where a young species had just proven that not all prey was helpless. Humanity had won their first war among the stars, but the real battle for survival was about to begin.